I'm Hayden McAvoy, founder of A-Team Tuition and the A-Game podcast. I grew up with ADHD, went from failing the first 9 years of school to becoming a straight-A student. Since then, I partnered with over 100 schools and helped over 20,000 students become A students through the same method. This podcast is exactly how we've done it. Let's find your A-game. All you'll ever be good at is swimming up and down a black line. The words that echoed through my year 9 math class from my math teacher. I could feel the anxiety shoot up the back of my head and my heart rate racing as everybody in the class was looking at me going, who's this clown? I was that student the system had written off too hard, and I believed it as well. Fast forward 20 years, and now I'm the CEO and founder of A-Team Tuition, and we've worked with over 20,000 students that were like me that are now A students. And now I have the pleasure of helping schools all over the country strategize their approach to helping students unlock their best potential. I know what it's like to be the worst kid in the class, and I also know what it's like to be the best. I believe that any student can achieve success with the right mindset, strategies, and support. And if I did it, you can too. Why I started this podcast, The A-Game, is I wanted to share that belief with anybody out there that feels how I felt, that feels like that is floating through life, that the system's forgotten about them, that is wondering why everybody else around them is better than them at everything, why they were born great, and why I was born always in trouble, essentially. You know, I started believing that narrative, and that's who I thought I was. And so over the years, I've had the fortunate opportunity to transform my own life and then pass that on systematically to transform many other students too. The A-Game is where I believe the intersection of education, performance psychology, and core raw belief in the impossible starts. The purpose of this is to share the lessons of transformation that we've learned along the way, the tips, the tricks, how I got out of there and how we've helped other students get out of there too, so that you can take that yourself and unlock your A-game. That's realistically the main purpose of this. So to kick this podcast off, to kick the A-Game off, it makes sense to start with my own transformational story and what that was like for me and how I went from essentially the worst student in the class to the best student in the class, getting straight A's, and equally at that same time, I was the fastest 16-year-old on the planet in the 100-meter freestyle. And so I know what it's like to be exceptionally bad at something, and I also know what it feels like to be at the highest tier of sport, of school, and now in business. And so with further ado, let's get into it, and this is my story. So everything started back in 1996 when I was 6 years old, and I just started grade 1. I came out of kindergarten, and at kindergarten I got along with so many kids. I had, there was wonderful staff there, and I made a lot of friends, and I was more of like the Pied Piper there. When I started grade 1, I thought that school would be the same experience for me, and I remember being quite excited for it. And then I remember on my first day being put into the difficult basket by a particular teacher, and I remember this teacher made me stand up in the middle of the class because I was upset that my parents had to leave. I had a bit of separation anxiety then. And I remember standing in the middle of the class with every kid standing around me and the teacher telling me I was baby and needed to pull my head in. And then for the next year, I had the challenges of working with this teacher that didn't like a child with ADHD. That was kind of the main thing. So I went from feeling extremely confident to having a lot of friends to being exceptionally isolated, and being 6 years old, I didn't know how to communicate this to my parents. So I would go to school every day in tears, and I remember being exceptionally scared to go to school. And this went on for the entire of grade 1. So I don't remember ever having a single friend in grade 1, and that was when everything kind of shaped my headspace in terms of who I was and where I was going. And so from there, I went into further years, and I pretty much started as a CD student, even though I was seen as intelligent, I guess you could say, when I was in kindergarten. And I started believing that that's who I was, that I was there just to pass, that I was lucky to even be in the class, that I wasn't going to get held down, that I didn't have any social skills, and it was quite a rough time. And as I got older and older, and I had more teachers that just saw a difficult ADHD student, that just became my identity and who I was. And what's difficult about it is back then, ADHD, it wasn't really a known thing, particularly in education. So as a child with ADHD, I remember I would get my report cards and they would be like, he's got intelligence. If he just applied himself, he would do well. And so I would gear up and I'd be so psyched. I'm like, I'm going to smash it this term. and I would try my hardest, and then within 10 minutes, my ADD would start kicking in, and then I would start getting bored and distracting others and flicking rubbers at kids. And what actually happens that I've learnt later in life that I didn't know at that time is with ADHD, you have a lower baseline dopamine. So by having that, you have this chronic anxiety that sits there that drives you to do impulsive things to get that dopamine hit. So you would want to distract another kid so that they spoke to you and laughed. And if they laughed, you would get that hit. So then it was like, that was my A game. That's what I would do, is I got very good at making friends with kids later in school and distracting them whilst also consistently getting in trouble at school. And so as the years went on, I started learning that I was better as the class clown, and I was better being the one to make everyone laugh than I was at grades. And then to couple that, I remember my grade 4 cross country, and I got dead last. I was literally last in the class. And so I just remember thinking, man, there's not really that much that I'm good at. I don't know what I'm going to do the rest of my life, but I'm good at making people laugh. And at the same time, my brother is Hayden McAvoy, who's the Olympic gold medalist in the 50 freestyle in the Paris Olympics and the 2-time world champion in the 50 freestyle in 2023 and 2025. He's my little brother, 3 years younger than me. I got to watch him come in and just dominate everything. He was one of the most hyper-talented people I've ever met, probably one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. And I remember we would do soccer and he would score all the goals, and then I would be the one on the bench. We would do swimming and he would win by 20 metres and I would get 4th and 5th. He would get straight A's in class and I'd be there getting C's and D's. You know, no matter what it was, he was so exceptionally good at everything, which further cemented my headspace of, oh, you're born that way. Because from home, it was the same thing. It wasn't for many, many years, which I'll talk about in later episodes, where I understood the way my brother thinks and why he's so good at everything. It comes down to the perception he has in life, which was so different to mine, because I'd really been trained that I was a bad kid, essentially. So when my story started to change was when I was nearing high school. My parents said, we're going to put you all in swimming, because Cam was really, really good at it from the learn to swim, and it was a sport that we all wanted to do. And so at that point, I was getting 4th, 5th at the school carnival, still swimming 3 times a week in lessons. But I started at Miami Swim Club on the Gold Coast, and that's where Grant Hackett was training at that time, and that was in about 2006, 2005, so even earlier, 2002. So that's when he was kind of at his top of his game. And I remember I was in the junior state squad, and his coach, Dennis Cottrell, who's now one of the greatest coaches to ever live, came around and decided he was going to take 3 junior boys and 3 junior girls up into their national squad. And so I don't know how, but I got chosen. And the 2 other boys that got chosen were the national butterfly champion and the national freestyle champion. And I was 5th at the school carnival. So it was an interesting choice. I didn't know why I got chosen, but we were all in for it. And I remember first session, you walk into the main clubhouse there, and up on the wall are all these frames of these famous swimmers who have all won Olympic Games that have trained at that pool. So you had like Ian Thorpe was up there, Grant Hackett's photo was there, Michael Phelps was up there, Gian Rooney, all people that had done seasons and trains there. And then we walk in, and down the end of the room is Grant Hackett sitting there stretching, who was one of our idols at that point. And this was when swimming was prolific and at its peak, and every single kid was into it. And I remember walking up to him, and the first thing he did was turn my hat from crooked to straight, because that's when everybody used to wear the crooked hats. We thought that was cool. And from there, we was on. We got to, I got the pleasure of seeing how one of the arguably greatest distance athletes in the world, in the history of the world, trained and performed. And I learnt so much being in that environment. And I think that's where everything changed for me. I felt that when I got chosen by Dennis, that there was somebody for the first time that wasn't my mum and dad that actually believed in me and what I could do. And so I remember sitting down, and Dennis was massive on character. He would always challenge your character, and he was real hard on you because he knew what he could get out of you. And so he pretty much said, if you have the right character and you train hard and you never give up, you can make the Olympics. And then the difference between people that make the Olympics and win the Olympics comes down to the 0.1% and who's willing to go the distance. It's whoever wants it the most. And so from there, I joined what was like a military-like swim squad, which was mental, where it was 6 kilometre sessions, 9 sessions a week. So I went from 3 sessions a week of 2 or 3K into that. And I remember for a year straight, I'll get lapped and I'll get yelled at and I'll get lapped. And it was embarrassing, but I had no choice. My parents still made me come. And I remember every single session, I would go in scared over what's going to happen. And I just didn't feel like I deserved it. I felt like I was fish out of water, because I still had that identity that they had made a mistake. I thought they had made a mistake. And slowly but surely, all of the distance swimming started getting me fitter and fitter and fitter. And Dennis also gave me a lot of punishment butterfly sets. And he was the type of guy where he's coaching the greatest 1,500 swimmer in the world, but he would stay at the pool till 9 p.m. to make sure I did my extra 5K of butterfly. And he wouldn't let me miss a single lap. Like, he was obsessed with it. You could see why he was one of the best. And so not long later, I qualified for the state titles for the first time, made the final and picked up a bronze medal in the 200 butterfly, which was massive. Then I qualified for nationals not long after. And I remember rocking up at nationals in Sydney and being like, wow, I do not deserve to be here. And I was 52nd going into my first event, the 100 fly heats, as a 14-year-old, and ended up jumping into the final around 8th or 9th on an outside lane. And so that final came and I was so nervous that day. I just started turning my brain off with it. And then I remember we walk out in my first national final, and this is big. You're with the big boys, the best in the country, particularly in the butterfly. And they introduce you person by person and talk about your stats and everything like that. And all of a sudden it's like this odd feeling of like, why are they doing that? Like, I'm nothing special. And there was this moment where I remember thinking, nobody here has done anywhere near the amount of butterfly laps that I have. Probably no one in the country at that point, because I had so much punishment butterfly for missing times and things like that. And I got up and just went, I'm just gonna go for it. I'm just gonna flog it and just see what happens. And so I tried to do a PB in the first 50, and I remember touching in the first 50 and turning and seeing that I was winning. I was tied first, and that identity thing kind of went out the window, and this adrenaline kicked in, and I was like, this anger and frustration of everybody that told me that I couldn't do it, and that I was useless, basically, just came in, and I just gave it everything. And I remember touching and looking across, and I touched second, and that was the transformational moment where my life changed forever. One moment, going from nothing to a silver medal at nationals, and I remember looking back and going, wow, you can do things in life that come down to how you prepare and how you train and who you are. It actually doesn't matter where you were born. And so afterwards, that resonated with me for a long time. And I went back to school and I started thinking, I'm actually pretty good at something. Like I'm second in the country as a 14-year-old, which is wild. Like, I used to idolize and look up to these kids that would win the school carnival, let alone nationals. And I remember thinking, well, maybe I am pretty good at stuff. And I made this decision that I was going to figure out what A students do that I'm not doing, and I was going to figure out the exact system to do it, and I wasn't going to stop until I did it. And that decision was when I went into school. I spoke to every one of my teachers, and I said, I'm going to go out of this term, you're going to help me do it. And I think they could see how serious I was. And I got announced at the assembly that I got second at nationals. And so there was that hype, and they knew that I was doing stuff. And so they all got behind me, fortunately, and said, yeah, let's do it. Let's get to work. And so every single class, I would move from the back corner right up the front, and I would engage as much as I could. And I just said, okay, well, I've got ADD. I know I can't focus. What can I do? And I thought, well, I'm going to write notes and just write as many notes as I can. The more notes I can do, the better. And then I said, I'm going to do more notes than any other kid in this class. And then I would go to my teacher after class and say, what do you think? And I would ask for extra questions and ask them how to study and those things. And then it started coming together. My grades started going from C minuses and Ds to C pluses and Bs. And then at that point, I met a particular student who ended up duxing our year in 2008, and an exceptionally intelligent girl. And I sat next to her and just started talking to her, and she was like, who are you? What are you doing? And I said, I want to learn what you do. And can you teach me everything? And I essentially got one of the best tutors for free, because every class I'd be like, how does this work? And she would explain it. And then I would start asking, what do you do at home? How do you approach your assignments? And so I started seeing patterns that she was exceptionally meticulous with how she worked. And it made sense because her parents both had worked high up in education. And so she had been brought up with these systems. And So she would go home and she would write a summary of everything she learned in class, and then she would do as many practice test questions as she could. And she did this every week, and bit by bit she got better. And I was like, why do you do this? And she said that she likes to win. And that's what it was about. She wanted to be the best. And I thought that was really cool. I got more obsessed with that than I did even with the swimming. And so I started adopting what she was doing, and I started getting competitive with her. And then I remember not long later, term 3, year 10, I walked out of my physics class, and it was my first ever straight A report card in math, physics, chemistry, English, and marine studies. And so that was a real turning point of like, I did it. It took a year and a half. It took 18 months. It wasn't overnight, but I actually did it. And from then my identity became I'm an A student. And I became obsessed with how do I then become an A+ student? How do I then get A's with the least amount of work? Like I just wanted to keep pushing that boundary. And over the next year and a half, I doubled down on my swimming. I would go to the library every lunch. I stopped. I got too obsessed, if anything, with it. And I hit my peak in year 12 where I made the Australian team, the Australian junior team, and competed at the Junior Pan Packs. It was an 18 under team and I was 16. And my time at that event was the fastest 16-year-old 100 freestyle time on the planet. At that point, I was still getting straight A's and A- and had figured out that balance. So then from there, I left school, and at university, I remember going into my Chemistry 1 course. Chemistry was an interesting one for me. It was my favorite subject because I felt by understanding it, I understood life, but it was also the subject where I had a particular teacher who just did not like me. And this teacher I had when I was in grade 10, and I remember I got a D in term 1 in chemistry, and then in term 2, I went, all right, I'm all in. And I remember reading the textbook every night. This is when I was learning from that student. And I got 100% on the term 2 exam. And I remember she would walk around and announce who won that term, who got the highest grade. And she announced me, and the whole class turned to me and were like, what? And even she said, yeah, you wouldn't believe it, but he somehow did it. And that was my experience with chemistry. And so when I went to university, it was a bit of a touch point, but I loved it. And so that was a subject at the start of uni. I said, I'm going to do the most volume of learning of anybody in this university for this subject and see how I go. And I ended up getting 99.9% on the final exam, and I topped that subject out of 1,000 kids after being that D kid in year 10 chemistry. And so from there, I continued to figure out how to get HDs, and I was swimming. The time I went at that Junior Pan Packs, which was in January of 2009, would have placed 5th at the Australian Olympic trials the year before. So if I'd done that 9 months before, I would have made the Olympics in that 4x1 relay. Went to Beijing as a 16-year-old. And so at that point, I thought, you know what, I'm going to have another crack at the London Olympics, and which was 4 years away. And so I moved squads, and then I got to be part of one of the most powerful squads on the planet. There were 13 Olympians, including some world record holders there, and I got to be immersed in what I would see as one of the most powerful cultures I've ever been a part of. And I remember we were right in mid-season one time, and I was ranked 7th in Australia in the Opens in the 100 free all year. My brother was 5th, and that's when he was starting to break through as a 15-year-old. And there was one Saturday we'd done 10 swim sessions, 6K for all those sessions, 3 gym sessions, and then we were in the middle of what we would call an hour-and-a-half Ironman circuit, which was this giant CrossFit circuit where we'd do all these lifts and then run a kilometre and have a break and do it 6 times. And so there, I was getting towards the end, I was getting over it and frustrated, and I remember dropping the ball once, and the lead, who was a guy called Brendan Rickard, who had the world record in the 100 breaststroke at that point and had won silver at the Olympics. He's the nicest guy ever, but he turned around and looked at me and said, if you don't want to be, get out, in front of the whole group. And it was the first time when I went, whoa, but at the same time, this is cool. The standard and eliteness in this group was unbelievable. And we were the fastest squad on the planet at that point in time. So then, long story short, I went to the London Olympic trials, and I didn't perform as well as I wanted to, and I ended up missing the team, and my brother got on in 5th, and that's when he made his debut at the Olympics. And after that, I decided that I didn't want to pursue swimming anymore. I had some injuries, and I was facing a decision: do I get a surgery to fix them and continue, or do I head on a new path? And university, I was doing so well in it. I was at a point where I was a part of a group that had some exceptionally intelligent people that were getting better grades than me even, and I was learning from them. And I would shut myself down for 2 weeks before exams, and I would literally sleep in the rooms at uni. I'd bring in like a sleeping bag and sleep on the floor and just be studying 24/7 for weeks, just trying to beat these kids. And I was enjoying that more, and so I decided to finish swimming. At that point, I was quite disappointed on how those trials went, and that's when I went, okay, what am I going to do? And I thought about, I want to find other students or other kids that were like me, either in swimming and get them to believe in themselves, or in school, and go from there.